Wicked Becomes Her is about Bette Davis. It's a book about Bette Davis. It's the story of really the making of her final film, Wicked Stepmother. But it's sort of told through the lens of a number of her other films. A lot of the films that she made in sort of the latter third to quarter of her career, from about 1962 or so on, starting with, say, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, were sort of filmed in this sort of horror genre type series of types of films that she would make. And Wicked Stepmother was really sort of inspired by that. Larry Cohen, who was the writer director, he crafted the film really to kind of highlight and showcase Bette Davis. He wrote the film specifically for her, cast her in it, got her to star in it, paid her $250,000 to star in Wicked Stepmother. She filmed about a week of filming, and she left the film. And the story that sort of takes place, or that happened, is the real basis of what the book is really about, because it's really about Bette Davis in the kind of latter throes of her career, and the lengths that she would go to try and get work, and the desire she had to keep working. And then it was really to look at all the other kind of films that led up to this, while I told the story of the filming of her final picture, which she actually would abandon, and then Cohen would decide to make without her. He would actually rework the script after she left after about a week of filming, and he would remake the film and to explain her absence. And she was very upset and angry at the news that she would be in this film anyway. And the film ultimately then would become a bit of a marker for her, because obviously it was her last big screen appearance, but at the same time it was not really the film of the quality that she would have wanted to sort of go out on with a final film. And that's really the story of the book. What makes this Bette Davis book different than other books on Bette Davis? Again, it is really the story of her final film. One of the things that sort of became apparent to me, and I've been a big Bette Davis fan for many years, and I really kind of respect and enjoyed her career, and like a lot of her films, including a lot of the ones that I think people don't even think are very good films, some of the latter throes of films that she would have made. But the thing is that when you read books, a lot of books about Bette Davis, they rarely cover her final film. There's very little, if any, mention. Some of the books that were written about Bette Davis and sort of her life and career were written even before she passed away and before she made her last couple of films. They sort of assumed her career was over in the early 80s, after her stroke and her health issues. And sort of discounted a lot of her other work. So some of the work that she made in the kind of latter decade of her life are sort of discounted, and in particular, Wicked Stepmother is often discounted. Some cases it's discounted as much because the film isn't very good, and in terms of when looking at the career of Bette Davis, you might want to see her in the best of light and want to kind of herald all the successes she had, and therefore a biographer might not want to highlight or talk much about films that were sort of not impactful on her career. But I think that because Wicked Stepmother was her final film, it has a special place in the kind of history of Bette Davis's long career. The fact that Wicked Stepmother is not a very good film and that her performance isn't very good at it is in itself relevant, because it does ultimately have very little impact on the fact that Bette Davis is still considered one of the greatest actresses of the 20th century, huge success, one of the biggest stars that we've ever had, and so therefore the movie doesn't really have a big relevancy in kind of looking at the length of her career, but the fact that it is the final film, I think, makes it sort of important. And I really did want to look at the story, because it is actually a fairly fascinating story for Bette Davis to have kind of been convinced to do this film, settle in to do it, and then decide not to do it for a combination of reasons, some of which are known to people because they assume that it's because she wasn't happy with the film, but other people also know that there were other medical and health issues that were there. And so I really wanted to look at the whole scope of the production of the filming of that movie, and the impact and changes of it, to actually bring it from what it was originally conceived as and what it ultimately would become, and then what it would mean in the historical perspective of looking at Bette Davis's career. How would Bette Davis respond to a book like this, considering she refused to talk about the film? Yes, people do know that when the movie ended, when she walked off the set, she flew to New York to meet with her dentist, and she had to have some medical treatment done to kind of deal with an issue with her dentures. She then lost weight. She had some other health issues. She would ultimately then decide not to return to the picture. She claimed that it was because the picture was lousy. She wasn't happy with the director. She wasn't happy with how she was appearing, and wasn't happy with certain things in the script. And so she would refuse to go back to the picture. Um, Larry Cohen, the producer, writer, director, then obviously thought about what his options were. He considered recasting her. He considered, redoing the film entirely. He could have even potentially waited, which he had talked about the fact that at one time, if she had just told him that, she needed time to come back, she would have. But ultimately, she would decide not to return to the film. He would make it without her. When she learned that he was going to finish this film and release it without her, she came out in the press and was very angry about it. So she said at one point in an interview that she refused to discuss the film and refused to talk about it with any members of the press. So in that respect, yeah, I think the book itself being about that topic would be an interesting thing. That maybe if the times were different, maybe that would be something I would think about. I actually didn't really think too much about that topic, partly because one, Bette Davis is no longer alive, so that's not really an issue. If Bette Davis were still alive today, she would be in upwards of 120 years old or something. So it would be quite a significant difference for Bette Davis as of today. The other thing that I think I discount that why she would not be, and I think she would be pleased about it. I think one of the things that I think is that she would like to know that people are still talking about her. People are still interested in Bette Davis's career, interested in who she was, the work that she did, enough to kind of cover these things. And I think that in itself would be of interest to her. The other thing about it was that, immediately after a film, or any project you obviously have you're very immersed in the activity, and therefore you have specific feelings about it, and you wouldn't want to talk about something that maybe had been an unhappy or difficult experience. But with Bette Davis, certainly when I researched her a lot, one of the things that occurred to me was that she became very honest. She was very honest with her fans and with the people that she spoke to about her career. She admitted when a movie that she made was terrible. She had plenty of movies that she was not happy with, that she'd hoped they were going to be better and they were not. And she would either blame the fact that maybe she shouldn't have been in the movie. She would blame the director or the producers or the cast members or whatever circumstances that she felt were the cause that it wasn't such a good movie. Maybe the script was bad. She would be very honest about that. So in a lot of the research I did, I found that as she talked about films years after their making, she would be very realistic about, that looking back at it from a historical purpose. So I think that in itself leads me to think that she would have been very comfortable talking about this topic because it would still be part of her career and she would have accepted that. I hope Bette Davis fans will respond positively to the book. Again, I wrote the book out of that same type of space. I am a big fan of Bette Davis's. I have followed her career, watched all of her movies, read about her many times in many different books. I've always been fascinated with her as an actress, and as a performer and as a person. So I've always been interested in learning and understanding her, and that's part of what drove me to research her and look at this book. I do feel that it's important that when you look at anyone, and I've written about lots of people who are famous, whether they're Alfred Hitchcock or Joan Crawford or Montgomery Clift or Lana Turner. I often write about things that are sometimes difficult, that might be less than wonderful. They're not, a lot of these celebrities and movie stars, certainly of Hollywood's golden era, their careers were cultivated for them, and their personalities and their personas and all the publicity around them was literally created for them. So a lot of the stories about their lives behind the scenes and off camera are sort of very interesting ones if you can uncover them and sort of discuss them in an objective way. I don't believe that making a bad film or performing in a movie that turns out to not be successful, or that your performance isn't even good, necessarily negates or removes all of the things that you achieved before that. Bette Davis was a woman who she believed she needed to work to live. She commented on it that if she couldn't work, she didn't want to live. So that gives you the understanding of why she would do a film like Wicked Stepmother, why she would continue to seek out and look for opportunities to work. And that was sort of the drive behind the movie, Wicked Stepmother, but it was also the drive behind the book, Wicked Becomes Her, because I really did want to look at Bette Davis's career as a whole, but also focus on that latter part where she was really kind of struggling to maintain a career and find good work at a woman who was 80 years old, finding it difficult. And it's understandable that it would be difficult, and it's understandable that the projects that she might be offered would be maybe less than she would have hoped. But I think that in itself is an important part of her career. And if you're really interested in Bette Davis and you respect and like her, you want to like or you want to understand and see all of the components and factors of her life and understand her as a person as well as an actress, and not just look at some Hollywood publicity machine story about how wonderful she was or how great her movies or performances were. So the book is really intended to kind of go into that direction and tell a story that is sort of unique and different that fans of Bette Davis will have never had before.